The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's Diner on Route 47, creating rivulets that distorted the neon signs across the street. Colonel Marcus Henderson pulled his collar higher against the October chill as he stepped inside, shaking droplets from his uniform jacket. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He hadn't planned to stop here. Fort Braxton was still 20 miles south, and he had a briefing at 0800 tomorrow morning about Operation Nightfall, a mission so classified that only 12 people in the entire military knew its full scope. But his Jeep had started making that grinding noise again, and the mechanic shop next door wouldn't open until morning. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. A trucker hunched over pie and coffee at the counter. An elderly couple shared a late dinner in a corner booth. And at a table by the window sat a woman who immediately caught his attention, not because she was particularly striking, but because she looked so completely ordinary. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were simple: jeans, a flannel shirt, worn sneakers. She could have been a secretary, a teacher, or a grocery store clerk. She was reading a paperback novel while stirring sugar into her coffee, completely absorbed in the story. Henderson chose a booth across the aisle and ordered black coffee from the waitress, a tired-looking woman named Dolores whose name tag was slightly crooked. As he waited, he found himself glancing occasionally at the woman with the book. There was something about the way she held herself, a certain alertness beneath the casual demeanor, that reminded him of soldiers he'd known. "Evening," she said suddenly, looking up from her book. "You're military." It wasn't a question. Henderson looked down at his uniform, then back at her with a slight smile. "Guilty as charged. Colonel Marcus Henderson." "Rebecca Walsh," she replied, closing her book but keeping her finger between the pages. "Thank you for your service." "Appreciate that, ma'am." Henderson's coffee arrived and he took a careful sip. "You from around here?" "About 15 miles east. Small farm." Rebecca's eyes moved briefly to the window, then back to him. "You're from Braxton?" Again, not a question. Henderson nodded. "Passing through. Vehicle trouble." "The base has been busy lately," Rebecca observed, her tone conversational. "Lot more helicopter traffic than usual. Transport birds, mostly. Some of those big Chinooks." Henderson's hand paused halfway to his coffee cup. Fort Braxton's increased air traffic was supposed to be unnoticeable to civilians. The flight paths had been carefully planned to avoid populated areas, and most missions ran at night or in the early morning hours when few people would be watching the skies. "I wouldn't know about that," he said carefully. Rebecca smiled, a knowing expression that made Henderson slightly uncomfortable. "Of course not. I'm probably just imagining things." She returned to her book, but Henderson found himself studying her more closely. Her hands, he noticed, had small scars across the knuckles. Her posture, even while reading, suggested someone accustomed to watching her surroundings. And when the diner's front door opened with a sudden gust of wind, her eyes flicked up immediately to assess the new arrival before returning to her page. "What do you do for work, if you don't mind me asking?" Henderson found himself saying. "Farm work, mostly, some odd jobs in town." Rebecca turned a page without looking up. "I used to travel more when I was younger." "Military?" This time she did look up and Henderson saw something flicker in her eyes, amusement maybe, or recognition. "What makes you think that?" "Just a feeling." "Well, your feeling's right. Army. Did 3 tours before I got out." "Which theater?" "Afghanistan, primarily. Some other places that don't make the news." Henderson felt a slight chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Other places usually meant black ops, special operations, or classified missions that officially never happened. But Rebecca Walsh looked like someone who might have difficulty getting security clearance to visit a military base, let alone participate in covert operations. "What was your specialty?" he asked. "Intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, the kind of work where you spend a lot of time watching and listening." She took a sip of her coffee. "You learn to notice things, like how helicopter rotors sound different depending on the model. A Black Hawk has a very distinctive signature, for instance, and those new stealth variants they've been testing, they're quieter, but they have this particular harmonic frequency that carries further than you'd expect." Henderson set his coffee cup down carefully. Stealth Blackhawks were highly classified. The fact that they were even being tested was known to fewer than 50 people in the entire Department of Defense. And the acoustic signature she was describing was something that only someone with extensive technical knowledge would recognize. "I think you might be mistaken about what you're hearing," he said. "Might be," Rebecca agreed easily. "Like I said, I'm probably imagining things. Although I could have sworn I saw some unusual ground activity too. Convoys moving at night with their lights off, trucks that looked like they were carrying specialized equipment. The kind of gear you'd use for electronic warfare or signals intelligence." Every word she spoke landed like a physical blow. Operation Nightfall involved exactly the kind of equipment she was describing, and the nighttime convoys had been moving that gear into position for the past 2 weeks. The routes were classified, the timing was classified, and even the existence of the operation was known only to a handful of senior officers. "Ma'am, I think you might be confused about what you've been seeing," Henderson said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "Sometimes civilian observations can be misinterpreted." Rebecca closed her book entirely now and leaned back in her booth. "Oh, I'm sure you're right, Colonel. After all, what would a simple farm woman know about military operations?" Her smile was polite, but there was steel underneath it. "I'm sure I couldn't possibly recognize the difference between a standard patrol and a unit conducting electronic surveillance of foreign communications intercepts." Henderson felt the blood drain from his face. Electronic surveillance of foreign communications intercepts was the core mission of Operation Nightfall. It was so classified that even mentioning it in an unsecured location was a court-martial offense. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," he began. "Has there?" Rebecca's voice remained conversational, but her eyes had gone cold. "You know, Colonel, I've found that people often underestimate what others might know, especially when those others don't fit their expectations." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn wallet. Extracting what looked like an old military ID card, she slid it across the table to Henderson. The card was genuine. He could tell immediately from the weight, the texture, the security features. But the information on it made his hands shake slightly as he read it. "Master Sergeant Rebecca M. Walsh, United States Army Special Operations Command. Security clearance, top secret /SCI. The photo showed the same woman sitting across from him, but in military dress uniform, with decorations that Henderson recognized as some of the highest commendations for classified operations. The card's expiration date was only 6 months old. "I retired quietly," Rebecca said, taking the card back. "Officially, I was never in special operations. Officially, I spent 8 years pushing papers in supply offices. Officially, I never saw action in Syria, Yemen, or Pakistan. And officially, I never worked with signals intelligence units to intercept and decrypt foreign military communications." Henderson's mind was reeling. If this woman was who she claimed to be, then she wasn't just some civilian who had accidentally observed classified activities. She was someone with intimate knowledge of the exact type of operation that Nightfall represented. "Why are you telling me this?" he managed to ask. "Because tomorrow morning you're going to walk into a briefing room and discuss a mission that you think is perfectly secure. You're going to talk about electronic intercepts, about classified equipment, about operations that you believe are invisible to civilian observation." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "And I wanted you to understand that sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about who might be watching." She stood up, leaving money on the table for her coffee. As she pulled on a worn jacket, Henderson noticed for the first time that it had faded patches where military insignia had once been attached. "Enjoy your briefing tomorrow, Colonel," she said. "And remember, just because someone looks ordinary doesn't mean they are." Rebecca Walsh walked out into the rain, leaving Henderson staring after her through the streaked window. As her taillights disappeared down Route 47, he realized that everything he thought he knew about operational security had just been turned upside down. The waitress refilled his coffee without being asked. "She's an interesting lady," Dolores commented. "Been coming in here for about 2 years now. Always polite, always tips well. Most folks think she's just another local." Quote, "What do you think?" Henderson asked. Dolores shrugged. "I think there's a lot of stories in this world that don't get told. And sometimes the most interesting people are the ones who look like they don't have any stories at all." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Henderson stared down at his coffee, his mind racing. In 12 hours, he would be sitting in the most secure briefing room on Fort Braxton, discussing Operation Nightfall with the highest-ranking officers in the region. The mission had been planned for months, with every detail scrutinized for security risks. But somehow, a woman who claimed to be a retired farm worker had just demonstrated knowledge of classified operations that should have been impossible for any civilian to possess. The question that would keep him awake all night was simple. If Rebecca Walsh knew about Operation Nightfall, who else might know? And more importantly, what else did she know that she hadn't told him? Colonel Henderson barely slept that night. He arrived at Fort Braxton at 0630, 2 hours before his scheduled briefing, and immediately headed to the Secure Communications Center in Building 7. The facility hummed with the quiet efficiency of round-the-clock operations, banks of computers, and encrypted communication equipment staffed by technicians with the highest security clearances. "I need you to run a background check," Henderson told Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, the duty officer for classified personnel records. "Complete military service record for Rebecca M. Walsh, formerly Master Sergeant Special Operations Command." Santos's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Time frame for service, sir?" "Recent retirement, within the last year." Henderson paced behind her workstation, unable to shake the memory of Rebecca's knowing smile and the casual way she had mentioned stealth helicopters. After several minutes, Santos frowned at her screen. "Sir, I'm showing Rebecca Walsh, who retired from the Army 8 months ago, but her record is unusual." "How so?" "Most of her service history is classified above my clearance level. What I can see shows 8 years of service, but the duty assignments are all listed as, quote, administrative support, various locations. No combat deployments, no special operations experience." Henderson felt a chill. "What about her security clearance?" Quote, "Shows top secret/SCI, but again, the specifics are blocked." Santos looked up at him. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why the interest in this particular soldier?" Before Henderson could answer, his secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed General Patricia Blackwood, commanding officer of Fort Braxton, and one of only 3 people who knew every detail of Operation Nightfall. "Henderson, my office, now." The line went dead. Henderson looked at Santos. "Print everything you can access on Walsh. And I mean everything. Duty stations, performance evaluations, commendations, anything that isn't sealed." General Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of the base's command center, with windows overlooking the parade grounds where morning PT was already in progress. Blackwood herself was a compact woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had earned her stars in Afghanistan and Iraq, leading from the front in some of the most dangerous operations of both conflicts. "Marcus, we have a problem," she said without preamble as Henderson entered. "Intelligence received a report this morning about possible security breaches related to Nightfall." Henderson felt his stomach drop. "What kind of breaches?" "Civilian observations of our preparations. Someone has been watching our night convoys, tracking helicopter movements, possibly even monitoring our communications." Blackwood gestured to a thick folder on her desk. "NSA flagged several cell phone calls from this area that mentioned unusual military activity. The calls were analyzed for voice patterns and geolocation." She opened the folder and pulled out a series of surveillance photos, grainy images captured by security cameras at various locations around the base perimeter. In several of them, Henderson could make out a figure standing beside a parked car, apparently observing the base through binoculars. "The vehicle is registered to a Rebecca Walsh," Blackwood continued. "Lives about 15 miles east of here. We've had her under surveillance since yesterday." Henderson's mouth went dry. "General, I may have additional information about Walsh." "Go on." Henderson recounted his encounter at the diner, leaving out no details. As he spoke, Blackwood's expression grew increasingly grim. "She mentioned stealth helicopters specifically?" Blackwood asked. "Not just mentioned them. She described their acoustic signature in technical terms that would only be known to someone with extensive experience in aviation acoustics or signals intelligence." Blackwood picked up her secure phone. "Get me Colonel James Mitchell at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Priority 1. She looked back at Henderson while waiting for the connection. "If this woman is who she claims to be, we need to know everything about her background immediately." The call connected. "Jim, it's Patricia Blackwood. I need an immediate deep background check on a former Master Sergeant named Rebecca Walsh. Yes, I'll hold on. While they waited, Blackwood pulled up a map of the area surrounding Fort Braxton on her computer. Show me exactly where this diner encounter took place. Henderson pointed to a location on Route 47. Murphy's Diner, about 20 miles north of the base. That's interesting, Blackwood murmured. Our night convoys follow 3 different routes to the staging area. Route 47 provides a clear line of sight to 2 of those routes. She marked several points on the map. If someone knew what to look for and positioned themselves correctly, they could observe our entire transportation schedule. The phone buzzed. Blackwood picked it up and listened intently for several minutes, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. I understand. Send me everything you have. She hung up and turned to Henderson. Rebecca Walsh is real, and her background is more complicated than either of us imagined. Blackwood pulled up a classified file on her computer screen. Master Sergeant Rebecca Walsh, retired. 12 years of service, not 8. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and deployment records that are so heavily classified that even I don't have access to all the details. What about her claims regarding special operations? Confirmed. She was attached to Task Force 160, the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, for 4 years. Her specialty was electronic warfare and signals intelligence. She has extensive training in intercepting and analyzing enemy communications. Blackwood scrolled through the file. Her commendations include the Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Purple Heart, and several classified decorations that I can't discuss even in this secure environment. Henderson sank into a chair. So everything she told me was true. Gets worse, Blackwood continued. According to DIA, Walsh didn't retire voluntarily. She was medically discharged following an incident in Syria that's still classified. The details are sealed, but it involved a mission that went wrong, resulting in casualties and a significant intelligence compromise. What kind of compromise? The kind that gets people killed and burns intelligence networks that took years to build. Blackwood closed the file. Walsh was one of only 3 survivors of her unit. The other 2 were subsequently reassigned to non-operational positions. Walsh was offered the same deal, but chose medical retirement instead. Henderson felt pieces clicking into place. She's angry. More than angry. According to her psychological evaluation, she felt abandoned by the military after giving 12 years of her life to operations that officially never happened. Her entire service record was sanitized to protect ongoing operations, which means she can never receive proper recognition for her sacrifices. And now she's watching us, Henderson realized. Not as a hostile foreign agent, but as someone who knows exactly how these operations work and wants to prove she still has access to information we think is secure. Blackwood nodded grimly. The question is whether she's just making a point or if she has more dangerous intentions. She picked up a red telephone that connected directly to the Pentagon. I'm calling an emergency review of Operation Nightfall security protocols. We may need to postpone or relocate the entire mission. General, what if we brought her in? Blackwood paused with the phone halfway to her ear. Explain. Walsh isn't some random civilian who stumbled onto classified information. She's a decorated intelligence specialist who knows our procedures because she helped develop them. Instead of treating her as a security threat, what if we brought her in as a consultant? That's a hell of a risk, Marcus. So is assuming that our operational security is intact when we know she's been watching us. If Walsh can identify our vulnerabilities, she might also be able to help us fix them. Blackwood set the phone down and stared out the window at the base below. There's something else. DIA mentioned that Walsh has been in contact with other veterans from her former unit. 3 of them have also settled in rural areas near major military installations, 2 near Fort Campbell, 1 near Fort Stewart. Henderson felt a chill. A network. Possibly, or possibly just friends staying in touch. But the coincidence is troubling. Blackwood turned back to him. If we bring Walsh in, we need to be prepared for the possibility that she's not acting alone. What do you recommend? We approach her carefully. Officially, we invite her to consult on base security vulnerabilities. Unofficially, we find out exactly what she knows, who she's been talking to, and whether Operation Nightfall has been compromised beyond repair. Blackwood picked up her secure phone again. I'm authorizing a controlled approach. You'll lead a small team to make contact with Walsh and assess the situation. If she's genuinely trying to help, we bring her into the fold. If she represents a security threat. She left the sentence unfinished. Henderson stood up. What's my authorization level for this approach? Whatever you need. But Marcus understands that if Walsh or her associates have compromised Nightfall, the consequences will extend far beyond this base. The intelligence we're planning to intercept could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. The stakes couldn't be higher. I understand, General. I hope so, because if we're wrong about Rebecca Walsh, a lot of people are going to die. As Henderson left the General's office, his mind was already working on the approach strategy. Rebecca Walsh had demonstrated that she knew far more than any civilian should about classified military operations. The question was whether that knowledge made her an asset or a threat. Either way, he was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. The secure elevator descended toward the main floor, and Henderson realized that his assumption about who could and couldn't access sensitive information had been shattered completely. In the world of military intelligence, apparently, the most dangerous people were often the ones who looked most ordinary. And Rebecca Walsh, with her farm clothes and paperback novel, might be the most dangerous of all. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road that wound through 30 acres of corn stubble and fallow fields. Henderson approached in an unmarked vehicle, accompanied by Captain Lisa Rodriguez from Military Intelligence and Sergeant Tyler Brooks, a communications specialist. The morning sun cast long shadows across the property, and Henderson could see why Rebecca had chosen this location. It offered clear sightlines in all directions and multiple escape routes through the surrounding woodland. As they pulled into the driveway, Henderson noticed immediately that this wasn't the simple farm setup Rebecca had implied. A sophisticated radio antenna rose from behind the main house, and he could spot at least 3 security cameras mounted strategically around the property. The barn had been modified with what looked like reinforced doors and blackout windows. This isn't a working farm, Rodriguez observed quietly. This is a surveillance station. Rebecca emerged from the house before they could knock, wearing the same practical clothes as the night before, but now carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. She had been watching their approach. Colonel Henderson, she greeted him with a slight smile. I wondered when you'd show up. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Ms. Walsh, we need to talk. I figured. That's why I made extra. She gestured toward the house. Come on in. Your people can wait in the living room while we chat in the kitchen. Henderson hesitated. Walking into Rebecca's home felt like entering potentially hostile territory. But refusing would signal distrust that might close off communication entirely. Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Brooks stay with me. Fair enough. Rebecca led them inside. The interior of the house was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized. Henderson's trained eye immediately cataloged several details that confirmed his suspicions. Blackout curtains on all windows, multiple communication devices on a side table, and what looked like a tactical operations map mounted on one wall but covered with a cloth. The kitchen was surprisingly normal. Worn wooden table, mismatched chairs, the smell of fresh coffee. Rebecca poured 4 mugs and sat down across from Henderson. So, she said conversationally, how much did your background check turn up? Rodriguez leaned forward. Enough to know that your retirement story was incomplete. Most good stories are. Rebecca sipped her coffee. The question is whether you're here to arrest me or recruit me. Henderson studied her carefully. That depends on what you're really doing out here. What I'm doing, Rebecca said, is watching. Same thing I did for 12 years in the Army, except now I'm doing it for my own reasons instead of yours. Watching what? Specifically? Rebecca stood up and walked to the window overlooking the fields. You want to know what I've observed? Fine. 3 weeks ago, you started moving specialized electronic surveillance equipment from Fort Braxton to a staging area approximately 12 miles southeast of the base. The equipment includes mobile SIGINT platforms, satellite communication arrays, and what appears to be advanced decryption hardware. Henderson felt his blood pressure rising. Every detail she mentioned was accurate and highly classified. 2 weeks ago, Rebecca continued, you began conducting night training exercises with units that aren't officially stationed at Braxton. I've identified personnel from Fort Gordon, Fort Meade, and at least 2 other installations. The exercises focus on rapid deployment and electronic warfare scenarios. How could you possibly know that? Brooks demanded. Rebecca turned back to them with a thin smile. Because I helped design the protocols you're using. The electronic signatures, the communication patterns, the deployment timing. I wrote half the manual on covert SIGINT operations. She walked to the covered map on the wall and pulled away the cloth, revealing a detailed tactical display of the entire region around Fort Braxton. Colored pins marked locations, with lines connecting various points. It looked like something from a military command center. This is your operation, Rebecca said, pointing to a cluster of red pins. You're planning to intercept communications from a foreign intelligence network that you believe is operating in this region. Specifically, you're targeting encrypted transmissions between a cell and their handlers overseas. Henderson stood up abruptly. That's enough. You're coming with us. Am I under arrest? You're a person of interest in a matter of national security. Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. Colonel, I've been a person of interest in matters of national security for the past 8 months. The difference is that now you know I exist. She walked to another wall and pulled down a different map, this one showing the entire southeastern United States. Dozens of pins marked locations across multiple states. Fort Campbell, she said, pointing to a cluster of pins in Kentucky. 2 former members of my unit have been monitoring unusual activity there for the past 6 months. Increased HUMANT operations, foreign language specialists being brought in from other bases, and communication intercepts that suggest a major operation in planning. Her finger moved to Georgia. Fort Stewart. Another former teammate has observed similar patterns, enhanced security protocols, specialized equipment movements, and personnel transfers that don't match normal training cycles. Henderson felt the room spinning. You're running a network. I'm staying in touch with friends, Rebecca corrected. Friends who, like me, were discarded by the military after giving everything to operations that officially never happened. Friends who still have the skills and training to recognize when something big is happening. Rodriguez had been taking notes furiously. What's your endgame here? What do you want? Rebecca turned to face them directly. I want acknowledgement. I want recognition for what my team sacrificed. And I want to know that the intelligence networks we died for are still being protected by people who understand what they're dealing with. And if we can't provide that, Henderson asked, then I keep watching, and I keep documenting. And eventually, I take what I've learned to people who will listen. Rebecca's voice hardened. There are journalists, congressional oversight committees, and international intelligence services that would be very interested in the details of American covert operations. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Henderson realized that they were dealing with someone who had the knowledge to cause catastrophic damage to American intelligence operations and the motivation to use it. There's another option, Rebecca continued, her tone softening slightly. You bring me in as a consultant. You let me help ensure that your operations are secure and effective. And you provide official recognition for the sacrifices made by my unit in Syria. That's not how this works, Rodriguez said. Isn't it? Rebecca pulled out a tablet and showed them a document. This is a detailed analysis of the vulnerabilities in your current operation, communication protocols that can be intercepted, deployment patterns that reveal your intentions, and security gaps that any competent intelligence service could exploit. Henderson looked at the document and felt his stomach sink. Every vulnerability Rebecca had identified was real, and several were ones that his own security team had missed. You've also got a leak, Rebecca added casually. Someone with access to your operational planning has been selling information, not to foreign governments, to private military contractors who bid on the same projects you're trying to protect. Quote, That's impossible, Brooks said. The security clearances required. The leak isn't someone with access to the full operation, Rebecca interrupted. It's someone with access to logistics information, equipment requests, personnel transfers, budget allocations. Someone who can piece together the scope and timing of classified operations by analyzing the support requirements. She showed them another document, a detailed financial analysis tracking procurement patterns that matched exactly with Operation Nightfall's timeline. Your leak has been active for at least 8 months, Rebecca continued. They're careful, methodical, and they understand how to extract actionable intelligence from seemingly innocuous administrative data. Henderson sank back into his chair. If Rebecca was right, Operation Nightfall had been compromised before it even began. Worse, the compromise might extend to other operations at other bases. "Why are you telling us this?" he asked. "Because despite everything that happened to my team, I still believe in the mission. The intelligence you're trying to collect will save American lives. But if you proceed with current security protocols, you'll fail. And failure means the terrorists you're hunting will disappear back into the shadows." Rebecca sat back down at the table. "So here's my proposal. You read me into Operation Nightfall as a security consultant. I help you identify and plug the leaks, redesign your operational security, and ensure that your mission succeeds. In return, you provide official recognition for my unit's service record, and stop treating decorated veterans like security threats when they try to help." Henderson looked at Rodriguez, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They were out of their depth, and they all knew it. "I'll need to clear this with General Blackwood," Henderson said. "Of course, but Colonel, understand that time is working against you. The foreign cell you're targeting isn't going to wait for you to sort out your security problems. They're planning something, and if you don't intercept their communications soon, you'll miss your chance to stop them." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window again. "There's one more thing you should know. The reason I've been watching Fort Braxton so closely isn't just professional interest. Intelligence suggests that the cell you're hunting has been conducting surveillance of their own. They know you're coming." Quote. She turned back to them with an expression that was deadly serious. "Which means Operation Nightfall isn't just compromised, it's walking into a trap." General Blackwood's secure conference room had never felt smaller. Around the polished oak table sat the core team for Operation Nightfall: Henderson, Rodriguez, NSA liaison David Chen, CIA Representative Sarah Kim, and now Rebecca Walsh, who had been granted temporary security clearance after 18 hours of intensive background verification and polygraph testing. The atmosphere was tense. Within 6 hours of Rebecca's warning about the operation being compromised, Signals Intelligence had confirmed her worst fears. "Show them," Blackwood said grimly. Chen activated the room's secure display system. At 0347 this morning, we intercepted a series of encrypted communications originating from a location approximately 8 miles from our staging area. The encryption is sophisticated, military-grade. The screen showed a map with pulsing red dots indicating transmission sources. Rebecca leaned forward, studying the pattern. "They're using rotating frequencies," she observed. "Classic counter-surveillance technique. Someone taught them our playbook." "It gets worse," Kim added. "We've identified the encryption signature. It matches protocols used by a private military contractor called Meridian Solutions." Henderson felt his stomach drop. Meridian was on the bidding list for the original SIGINT contract that became Operation Nightfall. "And they lost," Blackwood said, "to us. The question is how they obtained classified information about our operational parameters." Rebecca was still studying the display. "The transmission timing coincides with your equipment movements. They're not just aware of your operation, they're monitoring it in real time." She stood up and walked to the display, pointing to specific locations. "Look at the positioning. These aren't random surveillance posts. They've established a perimeter that gives them oversight of your primary and secondary staging areas, your communication relays, and your withdrawal routes." "You're saying they know everything," Rodriguez said. "I'm saying they know enough to disrupt your operation or steal the intelligence you collect." Rebecca turned back to the group. "The question is which one they're planning." Chen pulled up another screen showing financial records. "Meridian Solutions has contracts with 3 foreign governments currently under investigation for terrorism financing. If they're selling American intelligence capabilities to hostile actors." "They're not just competitors," Kim finished. "They're traitors." Blackwood's secure phone buzzed. She answered it, listened for several minutes, then hung up with an expression of barely controlled fury. "That was Pentagon intelligence. They've been conducting a parallel investigation into Meridian Solutions for the past 3 months. Meridian has been systematically infiltrating classified military procurement processes, stealing operational details, and selling the information to foreign buyers." "How systematic?" Henderson asked. "Fort Campbell, Fort Stewart, and 4 other installations. Every major SIGINT operation for the past year has been compromised to some degree. Blackwood looked directly at Rebecca. Your veteran network wasn't just observing unusual activity, you were documenting a coordinated intelligence theft operation. Rebecca nodded grimly. My friends at those bases reported the same patterns I saw here. Increased security that somehow wasn't effective, operational details that seemed to leak despite classification levels, and foreign contractors who always seemed to know just enough to undercut legitimate American operations. The leak inside our operation, Rodriguez said. It's connected to Meridian. Has to be, Rebecca agreed. Someone with administrative access has been feeding them logistics information, equipment manifests, personnel transfers, budget allocations, everything they need to piece together operational timelines and capabilities. Chen was typing rapidly on his secure terminal. I'm running a cross-reference of all personnel with access to Nightfall logistics data against financial records, communication patterns, and background updates. While he worked, Rebecca moved to the map display and began marking additional locations. If Meridian is running a comprehensive intelligence theft operation, they'll have established multiple surveillance posts, communication intercept capabilities, and probably infiltration assets. Infiltration assets? Kim asked. Personnel inside our facilities. Not necessarily Americans. They could be foreign nationals with legitimate access through contractor positions, diplomatic cover, or academic exchanges. Rebecca marked several more points on the map. The pattern I'm seeing suggests a sophisticated human intelligence network supported by technical collection capabilities. Chen's terminal chimed. Got something. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, assigned to base logistics coordination. His financial records show irregular deposits over the past 8 months, totaling approximately $40,000. Where's Torres now? Blackwood demanded. According to duty rosters, he's supposed to be supervising equipment inventory at Warehouse 7, Chen checked another screen. But his access card hasn't been used since yesterday afternoon. Henderson was already standing. Warehouse 7 is where we stored the primary SIGINT equipment for Nightfall. Get security to that warehouse immediately, Blackwood ordered. Full tactical response. As Henderson coordinated with base security, Rebecca continued studying the intelligence displays. General, there's something else we need to consider. If Meridian has been monitoring your operation in real time, they know we've discovered their surveillance. Meaning? Meaning they're going to accelerate whatever they're planning. The foreign cell you're trying to intercept, if Meridian has warned them, they'll either disappear or spring whatever trap they've prepared. Kim was working on her own secure communications. CIA assets in the region report increased activity around suspected safe houses. Several high-value targets have gone dark in the past 12 hours. They're running, Rodriguez concluded. Or consolidating for something bigger, Rebecca countered. Think about it from their perspective. They've invested months in setting up this operation. They've infiltrated American intelligence capabilities and established comprehensive surveillance of our facilities. They're not going to just walk away. Henderson's radio crackled. Colonel, we're at Warehouse 7. The building is secure, but approximately 30% of the stored equipment is missing. Looks like it was removed systematically over several days. Blackwood's face went pale. What equipment specifically? Primary mobile SIGINT platform, 3 portable decryption units, and all the specialized communication intercept hardware. Rebecca felt pieces clicking into place. They're not trying to stop your operation or steal your intelligence. They're trying to replace it. Explain, Blackwood said. Meridian has stolen your equipment and operational procedures. They're going to conduct their own version of Operation Nightfall, intercept the same communications you're targeting, and sell that intelligence to whoever pays the most. Rebecca pointed to the map. But to do that convincingly, they need to ensure that your legitimate operation fails. A false flag operation, Kim realized. They make it look like we compromised ourselves through poor security, then position themselves as the reliable alternative for future contracts. Chen's terminal chimed again. I'm showing multiple vehicle movements from Meridian facilities toward our operational area. Large trucks, probably carrying the stolen equipment. How long until they're in position? Henderson asked. Based on current tracking, approximately 4 hours. Blackwood stood up and moved to the secure phone. I'm calling for immediate reinforcement of all Nightfall assets. We're not letting them steal this operation. General, wait, Rebecca said. If you reinforce your positions, you're playing into their strategy. They want a confrontation that makes it look like American military security is incompetent. Then what do you suggest? Rebecca studied the map for a long moment. We let them think they've succeeded. We allow them to establish their false operation while we conduct the real mission from a completely different location. That's impossible. All our equipment is either in place or stolen. Not all of it, Rebecca smiled for the first time since entering the room. Remember, I helped design these protocols. I know what equipment is actually essential for the mission, and what's just standard operating procedure. She moved to the display and began highlighting different locations. Your stolen equipment is impressive but not irreplaceable. The real intelligence you need can be collected with a much smaller footprint, if you know exactly what you're looking for and where to find it. You're talking about conducting Operation Nightfall with improvised equipment, Rodriguez said. I'm talking about conducting it the way we used to do it in the field, when everything went wrong and we had to complete the mission anyway. Rebecca looked around the room. The foreign cell you're hunting is planning something specific. They're using encrypted communications to coordinate timing and logistics, but they're also human beings operating under stress in hostile territory. Meaning? Meaning they'll make mistakes, and when they do, a small team with the right skills can exploit those mistakes without massive electronic surveillance platforms. Rebecca's expression hardened. The question is whether you trust a discarded veteran to help you catch the people trying to kill Americans. Blackwood looked at the map, at the intelligence displays, at the faces around the table. Outside, the sun was setting, and somewhere in the darkness, enemies of the United States were preparing to strike. What do you need? She asked. Rebecca smiled grimly. A small team, basic communication equipment, and permission to conduct this operation the way it should have been done from the beginning. Done. But Rebecca, understand that if this goes wrong, General, a lot of people will die. That's why it's not going to go wrong. As the meeting broke up and preparations began for a completely reimagined Operation Nightfall, Henderson realized that everything he thought he knew about military operations had been turned upside down in the space of 48 hours. The question was whether they could put it back together again before their enemies struck first. The abandoned textile mill stood like a skeleton against the night sky, its broken windows reflecting the quarter moon. Rebecca crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the building through thermal imaging binoculars while Henderson and Rodriguez flanked the structure from opposite sides. This wasn't how Operation Nightfall was supposed to unfold, but it was how intelligence operations actually worked when everything went wrong. Thermal signatures confirmed, Rebecca whispered into her throat mic. 4 individuals on the 3rd floor, 2 on the ground level. Electronic emissions consistent with encrypted communication equipment. 24 hours earlier, her improvised approach had seemed desperate. Now, watching Meridian's stolen surveillance equipment fail to detect their minimal footprint operation, Rebecca felt vindicated. Sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. Movement on the east side, Rodriguez reported. Vehicle approaching. Looks like our foreign cell is arriving for their meeting. Through her binoculars, Rebecca watched a black sedan pull up to the mill's loading dock. 3 men emerged, moving with the careful precision of trained operatives. They carried briefcases and what appeared to be portable electronic equipment. That's our primary target, Henderson's voice crackled through the comm. Dr. Konstantin Petrov, suspected of coordinating terrorist financing through encrypted cryptocurrency networks. Rebecca adjusted her position to get a better view of the building's interior. The breakthrough had come 18 hours earlier, when her veteran network had provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Her former teammate at Fort Stewart had observed similar Meridian operations targeting a cryptocurrency exchange that specialized in anonymous transactions. The pattern was bigger than intelligence theft. It was a comprehensive effort to infiltrate and monetize terrorist financing networks. Rebecca, what's your assessment of their security posture? Henderson asked. She studied the building methodically, overconfident. They're relying on Meridian's surveillance perimeter to provide early warning, but Meridian's equipment is designed to detect large-scale military operations, not small teams using passive surveillance techniques. The real breakthrough had come when Rebecca realized that the foreign cell wasn't just using encrypted communications. They were using a specific type of encryption that she had encountered before. During her final mission in Syria, her unit had intercepted similar protocols being used by a network that was eventually traced to the same cryptocurrency exchange her Fort Stewart contact had identified. The encryption they're using, she continued, I've seen it before. It's not just military grade. It's specifically designed to integrate with cryptocurrency transaction systems. They're not just coordinating attacks. They're coordinating funding. Through her binoculars, she watched as the men from the sedan entered the building. Moments later, she could see figures moving on the third floor, setting up what appeared to be computer equipment. They're establishing a temporary command center, Rodriguez observed. Looks like they're planning to conduct multiple transactions tonight. Rebecca had spent the previous day working with NSA cryptographers to develop a passive interception technique that could capture the specific encryption protocols without alerting the targets to surveillance. It required getting much closer than traditional SIGINT operations, but it also meant they could intercept not just communications but actual financial transaction data. Henderson, I'm seeing heat signatures that suggest they've got more than just communication equipment up there, she reported. Looks like cryptocurrency mining rigs or transaction processing hardware. The pieces had fallen into place when Rebecca's analysis revealed that Meridian Solutions wasn't just stealing intelligence. They were positioning themselves to take control of the terrorist financing networks that American intelligence was trying to disrupt. By stealing the equipment and operational procedures for Operation Nightfall, they could intercept the same financial intelligence the military was targeting, then use that information to insert themselves as intermediaries in terrorist funding operations. Movement on the perimeter, Rodriguez warned, Meridian security team establishing positions around the building. Rebecca counted at least 6 figures moving through the shadows around the mill. They were armed and moving with military precision, but they were also following predictable patterns based on conventional security protocols. They're protecting their assets, she realized. Meridian isn't just stealing our intelligence capability. They're actively protecting the terrorist financing operation so they can profit from it. This was the revelation that had shocked even General Blackwood. Meridian Solutions wasn't just a corrupt contractor stealing classified information for competitive advantage. They were actively collaborating with foreign terrorist networks, using stolen American intelligence capabilities to facilitate attacks against American targets. Rebecca, can you get close enough for signal interception without compromising our position? Henderson asked. She studied the building's structure and the security perimeter. There's a storm drainage tunnel that runs under the building. I can access it from the creek bed about 200 meters south. Get me within 50 meters of their equipment, and I can intercept everything. That's too risky, Rodriguez protested. If they detect you, they won't detect me if I'm using passive collection techniques they don't know exist. Rebecca smiled grimly. Remember, I helped write the manual on covert SIGINT operations. I also wrote the manual on detecting covert SIGINT operations. I know how to avoid my own countermeasures. 20 minutes later, Rebecca was crawling through the narrow drainage tunnel beneath the textile mill. The tunnel was partially flooded with stagnant water that soaked through her clothes, but it provided perfect concealment from Meridian's surveillance equipment. More importantly, it positioned her directly beneath the building's main electrical systems, allowing her to tap into the electromagnetic emissions from the terrorist cell's equipment. The portable signal processor she carried was a fraction of the size of the equipment Meridian had stolen, but it was specifically calibrated for the encryption protocols she expected to encounter. Instead of trying to decrypt the communications in real time, it simply recorded the raw signal data for later analysis. In position, she whispered. Beginning signal collection. Through the building's floor above her, she could hear voices speaking in what sounded like Russian and Arabic. The electromagnetic signature of their equipment was strong and clear. They were definitely conducting cryptocurrency transactions, not just communications. But as she fine-tuned her collection equipment, Rebecca began picking up additional signals that made her blood run cold. The encryption protocols weren't just for financial transactions. They were for coordinating something much more immediate and dangerous. Henderson, I'm intercepting what appears to be timing coordination, she reported quietly. Multiple cell phones receiving identical encrypted messages with timestamp data. Timing for what? Rebecca adjusted her equipment to capture more of the signal data. I don't know yet, but the pattern suggests they're synchronizing multiple teams for simultaneous operations. Through her earpiece, she heard Rodriguez's voice. Vehicle convoy approaching from the north. 3 trucks, moving fast. Rebecca felt her heart rate spike. That's not part of their plan. Meridian's security would have been notified of any additional arrivals. Unknown vehicles, Henderson confirmed. Military-style trucks, but no identification markings. Rebecca was already moving, crawling back through the tunnel as fast as the cramped space allowed. Something had gone wrong with either Meridian's operation or the terrorist cell's security, and she was trapped beneath a building that was about to become a battlefield. "Henderson, I'm still collecting signal intelligence, but we've got a problem," she reported. "The signals I'm intercepting aren't just for tonight's operation. They're coordination protocols for a series of attacks scheduled across multiple time zones." Multiple attacks? Cryptocurrency transactions aren't just funding. They're triggering mechanisms. Someone is using financial transfers to activate sleeper cells across the United States. As she reached the tunnel exit, Rebecca could hear gunfire erupting above ground. The unknown convoy wasn't there for a meeting. They were there for a raid. "Rebecca, get out of there now," Henderson ordered. "Building is compromised." She emerged from the tunnel into chaos. Gunfire echoed from multiple directions as Meridian's security team engaged the unknown attackers. But through her signal collection equipment, which was still recording, Rebecca could hear something that made her realize the true scope of what they had stumbled into. The terrorist cell wasn't just coordinating funding for future attacks. They were activating attacks that were supposed to happen tonight, across multiple American cities, synchronized to overwhelm emergency response capabilities. "Henderson, we need to get this signal data to NSA immediately," she said, running through the darkness toward their extraction point. "They're not planning an attack. They're triggering multiple attacks that are already in motion." Behind her, the textile mill erupted in flames as the battle between Meridian's security forces and the unknown attackers intensified. But Rebecca's mind was focused on the data she had collected. Information that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil if they could get it to the right people in time. The question was whether they had enough time to stop attacks that were already beginning. As they reached their vehicle and sped away from the burning mill, Rebecca realized that everything they had discovered about Meridian Solutions and the terrorist financing network was just the beginning. The real operation was much larger, much more immediate, and much more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And they were the only ones who knew it was happening. The Pentagon's Crisis Action Center had been activated within minutes of receiving Rebecca's intelligence. The massive room buzzed with controlled urgency as analysts, military officers, and intelligence specialists worked to decode the intercepted data and coordinate responses across multiple time zones. Rebecca stood at the center of it all, her field clothes a stark contrast to the formal uniforms around her, but her expertise was now the most valuable asset in the room. Signal analysis confirms 5 separate cell activations. NSA Director Elizabeth Harper announced to the assembled team. Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, and New York. Each cell received identical cryptocurrency triggers at precisely 2,347 hours. Rebecca studied the decryption displays, her mind working through the patterns she had observed during her years in special operations. The timing isn't random. They've calculated optimal impact windows for each target city based on emergency response capabilities and population density patterns. "What kind of attacks are we looking at?" asked FBI Deputy Director Robert Manning. "Based on the communication protocols and financial transaction amounts, I'd estimate coordinated bombing attacks targeting critical infrastructure." Rebecca pointed to specific data streams on the main display. The cryptocurrency amounts correspond to operational funding levels for teams of 3 to 5 operatives per city. Henderson watched Rebecca work with grudging admiration. 18 hours earlier, he had considered her a security threat. Now she was the only person in the room who fully understood the intelligence they were trying to decode. "The Los Angeles cell has gone dark," reported CIA analyst Jennifer Torres. "Last communication was 23 minutes ago from a location near LAX airport." "Airport target," Rebecca said immediately. The financial trigger amount for LA was the highest. That suggests a high-casualty, high-impact target. Airport security, passenger terminals, or aviation fuel storage. General Blackwood had arrived from Fort Braxton and was coordinating with FBI tactical teams across the country. "How long do we have?" Rebecca studied the timing data from her intercepted signals. The triggers were activated in sequence, starting with the East Coast and moving west. That suggests they're accounting for time zone differences to maximize simultaneous impact. The best estimate is that we have 45 minutes before the first attacks begin. 45 minutes to stop 5 separate terrorist cells across the entire United States, Manning said grimly. "It's possible," Rebecca replied. but only if we use the intelligence we've collected to predict their exact targets and timing." Quote. She moved to a workstation and began pulling up additional data from her signal intercepts. The communication protocols included coordination codes that reference specific target categories. If I can decode those references. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she applied cryptographic techniques she had learned during her special operations career. The room fell silent except for the clicking of keys and the low hum of computer equipment. "Got something," Rebecca announced. Target category Alpha 7, transportation hubs. Beta 4, energy infrastructure. Gamma 2, financial districts. Each city has been assigned specific category priorities. Director Harper leaned over Rebecca's shoulder. "That's incredibly specific intelligence. How could you decode their operational categories so quickly?" "Because I've seen this system before," Rebecca replied grimly. "During our mission in Syria, my unit intercepted communications from the same network using identical classification systems. I helped develop the countermeasures, but I also memorized their operational codes." Henderson realized that Rebecca's knowledge went far deeper than anyone had suspected. She wasn't just familiar with the enemy's general methods. She had specific, intimate knowledge of their operational procedures. "Rebecca, if you encountered this network in Syria, why wasn't this intelligence shared with current operations?" he asked. "Because officially, our mission in Syria never happened," Rebecca replied bitterly. "When our operation was compromised and half my unit was killed, all intelligence from that mission was classified beyond access. The bureaucrats decided it was safer to bury the intelligence than risk exposure of how we obtained it." General Blackwood's expression darkened. "You're saying we could have prevented tonight's attacks if we had access to intelligence from your Syria mission?" "I'm saying that the same network my unit died fighting 3 years ago is now operating on American soil, and we're having to rediscover their methods in real time because someone decided that protecting bureaucratic secrets was more important than protecting American lives." The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. Rebecca's unit had died obtaining intelligence that could have prevented the current crisis, but that intelligence had been buried to protect classified sources and methods. "The Chicago cell is moving," reported an FBI analyst. "Cell phone tracking shows 3 individuals converging on the financial district. Vehicle tracking suggests they're carrying significant cargo. Financial district confirms the Beta 4 energy infrastructure target," Rebecca said, studying the decoded communications. "They're not targeting banks. They're targeting the electrical grid infrastructure that powers the financial district." Director Manning was already on the phone with FBI tactical teams. "Chicago SWAT, converge on electrical substation facilities in the loop. Suspect vehicle descriptions are being transmitted now." "New York cell is active," another analyst reported, "moving toward transportation targets in Manhattan." Rebecca cross-referenced the timing data with her knowledge of the enemy network's operational patterns. "New York will be simultaneous with Chicago. They want maximum confusion for emergency responders. Multiple cities hit at the same time with different target types." She turned to General Blackwood. "Generally, we need to coordinate with local emergency services to evacuate civilian populations from the predicted target zones. But we can't do it in a way that alerts the terrorist cells to our knowledge of their plans." "How do we evacuate airports and financial districts without causing panic or alerting the terrorists?" Henderson asked. "False emergencies," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "Gas leaks, electrical malfunctions, bomb threats called in by, quote, concerned citizens. Anything that provides legitimate cover for evacuation procedures." Director Harper was already coordinating with Homeland Security. "We're implementing Code Silver protocols for all predicted target zones. Emergency services will respond to manufactured crises that require civilian evacuation." "Houston Cell is accelerating their timeline," reported an NSA analyst. "Signal intercepts suggest they're moving toward energy infrastructure targets earlier than scheduled." Rebecca studied the new data. "They're adapting to law enforcement presence. The network has contingency protocols for when they detect increased security awareness." She looked up at the room. "We need to stop them before they realize we've broken their communication codes." "How?" General Blackwood asked. "Direct action. We know their targets, we know their timing, and we know their operational procedures. We hit all 5 cells simultaneously using information they don't know we have." Quote, Director Manning coordinated with tactical teams across the country. All units, you are authorized for immediate interdiction of suspected terrorist cells. Priority is prevention of attacks, not capture for intelligence purposes. On the main display, tracking data showed the movements of suspected terrorist operatives in all 5 target cities. Rebecca watched the patterns with the trained eye of someone who had spent years hunting similar networks. The Los Angeles team is at LAX, she announced. The Chicago team is approaching electrical infrastructure. The New York team is entering subway system access points. The Houston team is moving toward petrochemical facilities. The Atlanta team is... Wait. She paused, studying the Atlanta data more carefully. The Atlanta team isn't following the predicted pattern. They're moving away from infrastructure targets toward residential areas. Residential areas? Henderson asked. Rebecca felt her blood run cold as she realized what the Atlanta team was actually targeting. They're not hitting infrastructure. They're hitting the CDC. The Centers for Disease Control is in Atlanta, and if they're targeting biological research facilities. Biological weapons, Director Harper breathed. No, Rebecca said, her voice grim. Worse, they're targeting the facilities that would coordinate response to biological weapons attacks. If they take out the CDC during coordinated infrastructure attacks in other cities, it cripples America's ability to respond to follow-up biological attacks. The room erupted in controlled chaos as coordinators redirected Atlanta tactical teams towards CDC facilities while maintaining operations in the other 4 cities. All units execute simultaneously in 30 seconds, Director Manning commanded. Rebecca watched the coordinated operations unfold across 5 cities, knowing that success or failure would be determined in the next few minutes. The intelligence she had died for in Syria, the knowledge her unit had sacrificed everything to obtain, was finally being used to protect American lives. But as tactical teams moved into position across the country, Rebecca realized that even if they stopped tonight's attacks, the network she had been fighting for 3 years was still operational, still planning, and still determined to strike at the heart of American security. 30 seconds, General Blackwood announced. Rebecca closed her eyes and thought of her fallen teammates from Syria. Tonight, their sacrifice would finally mean something. Execute, Director Manning commanded. Across the United States, the final battle to stop the coordinated attacks began. The Crisis Action Center fell silent as reports streamed in from tactical teams across the country. Rebecca stood motionless, her hands pressed against the console, watching data feeds that would determine whether 3 years of fighting the same terrorist network had finally led to victory or devastating failure. Los Angeles team neutralized, came the first report. 3 suspects in custody, explosive devices secured at LAX Terminal 4, no casualties. Rebecca felt her first breath of relief in hours. The LAX cell had been stopped just minutes before they could detonate devices that would have killed hundreds of travelers and shut down one of America's busiest airports. Chicago successful, reported the second team. 4 suspects apprehended at an electrical substation, devices disarmed, financial district power grid secured. Director Harper was coordinating with FBI field offices, but her eyes remained fixed on Rebecca. The woman who had been dismissed as a simple farmer had become the crucial link in preventing what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. New York operation complete, came the third report. Subway system secure, 5 suspects in custody, including the primary cell leader. Chemical explosive devices neutralized. Henderson watched Rebecca's face as each successful report came in. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only the grim focus of someone who had seen too many operations end badly to celebrate before everything was finished. Houston team reporting, crackled the fourth communication. Petrochemical facility secure, 2 suspects neutralized, 1 in custody. Incendiary devices prevented from reaching primary targets. 4 cities were secured, 1 remaining. The room held its collective breath as they waited for word from Atlanta. The CDC operation was the most complex because the target represented not just immediate casualties, but America's ability to respond to future biological threats. Atlanta Control, this is Tactical 1, came the final transmission. CDC perimeter secured. 6 suspects in custody. Biological containment protocols remain intact. No security breach of research facilities. Quote, the Crisis Action Center erupted in controlled celebration. But Rebecca remained still, her mind already moving beyond the immediate success to larger implications. "Rebecca," General Blackwood approached her quietly. "Thanks to your intelligence, we prevented coordinated attacks that could have killed thousands of Americans and crippled critical infrastructure. The country owes you a debt that can never be repaid." Rebecca turned from the console, and Henderson saw exhaustion in her eyes that went deeper than the past 48 hours. "General, this network isn't finished. What we stopped tonight was just one operation. The Syria intelligence indicates they've been planning a multi-stage campaign against American targets for at least 3 years." Director Harper joined the conversation. "What kind of multi-stage campaign?" "Tonight was designed to test American emergency response capabilities and intelligence coordination. They wanted to see how quickly we could identify and respond to coordinated attacks across multiple time zones." Rebecca pulled up the original signal intercepts on her workstation. "The cryptocurrency triggers we intercepted weren't just for tonight's operations. They were also collecting response time data for future attacks." Henderson felt his stomach drop. "You're saying tonight was a probe?" "Tonight was a learning exercise. They sacrificed 5 cells and operational security to gather intelligence on how American security services coordinate responses to simultaneous terrorist attacks." Rebecca's voice was grim. "Now they know our response times, our coordination protocols, and our intelligence sharing procedures." The celebration in the room died as the implications sank in. They had prevented tonight's attacks, but they had also revealed their capabilities to an enemy network that was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. "The Syria mission," General Blackwood said quietly. "Tell me what really happened." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, then began speaking with the measured tone of someone giving an official debrief. "My unit was inserted into Syria to infiltrate a terrorist financing network that was using cryptocurrency systems to fund attacks across Europe and the Middle East. We spent 4 months gathering intelligence on their operational methods, communication protocols, and command structure." She paused, staring at the data displays. "We discovered that the network wasn't just funding attacks. They were using each attack as a learning opportunity to refine their methods and test target country responses. Every bombing, every assault, every failed plot taught them something new about how to defeat security measures." "What went wrong?" Henderson asked. "We were betrayed by someone inside American intelligence. Our mission parameters, our infiltration routes, our extraction procedures, all of it was sold to the enemy network." Rebecca's voice hardened. "When we tried to extract the intelligence we had gathered, we walked into an ambush. 4 members of my unit were killed. The surviving intelligence was classified beyond access to protect the identity of whoever had betrayed us." Director Harper leaned forward. "And you believe the same network was behind tonight's attacks?" "I don't believe it. I know it. The communication protocols, the operational timing, the target selection methodology. It's identical to what we documented in Syria." Rebecca turned to face the room. "Which means whoever betrayed my unit 3 years ago is still providing intelligence to this network." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Not only was the terrorist network still operational, but they had a continuing source of intelligence from within American security services. "General," Rebecca continued, "the reason Meridian Solutions knew so much about classified operations wasn't just because they had access to logistics information. They were working with someone who had access to operational intelligence at the highest levels." Henderson thought back to the past 48 hours, to the rapid escalation of security breaches and the sophisticated nature of the enemy's knowledge. Someone with access to multiple classified programs across different agencies. Someone with oversight authority, Rebecca agreed. Someone who could coordinate intelligence sharing between military and civilian agencies without raising suspicion. General Blackwood was already reaching for her secure phone. "I'm calling for an immediate security review of all personnel with oversight access to tonight's operation." "General, it's too late for a security review," Rebecca said quietly. "Whoever the source is, they now know that we've identified the network and disrupted their operations. They'll disappear or eliminate evidence before any investigation can reach them. Then what do you suggest?" Quote. Rebecca walked to the main display and pulled up a map showing the locations of tonight's attacks, the Meridian operations, and the intelligence patterns they had identified. "We use what we learned tonight to set a trap. We let the source think they've successfully gathered intelligence on our capabilities. Then we feed them false information about our next operation. A deception operation, Director Harper realized. Exactly, we make them think we're planning something they need to warn their terrorist allies about. When they take the bait, we trace the communication back to its source. Henderson studied the map, understanding dawning on him. You want to run a false flag operation to identify the traitor. I want to finish what my unit started in Syria, Rebecca replied. We died gathering intelligence on this network. That intelligence was buried to protect a traitor. Now we have a chance to expose both the network and the source that's been protecting them. General Blackwood looked around the room at the assembled intelligence professionals. It's risky. If the deception fails, we could compromise legitimate operations. If we don't try, Rebecca said, the network will adapt to what they learned tonight, and the next attack will be worse. They'll know exactly how to defeat our response procedures. Director Harper was studying Rebecca with new respect. What kind of deception did you have in mind? Rebecca smiled for the first time since the crisis began. We make them think we've discovered a major terrorist summit planned for next month. Something big enough that they'll have to warn their allies, but fake enough that we can control every aspect of the operation. And when will they take the bait? We follow the intelligence leak back to its source and finally get justice for the people who died in Syria. Rebecca's expression hardened. The question is whether American intelligence services are ready to admit that they've been harboring a traitor for 3 years. The room fell silent as the weight of that challenge settled over everyone present. They had prevented tonight's attacks, but the larger battle was just beginning. Henderson looked at Rebecca, the woman he had dismissed as a simple farmer just 2 days earlier, and realized that everything he thought he knew about courage, loyalty, and sacrifice had been redefined. When do we start? General Blackwood asked. Rebecca turned back to her workstation. We start now, because somewhere out there the people who killed my unit are planning their next attack on American soil, and this time, we're going to be ready for them. As the Crisis Action Center shifted from emergency response to planning the next phase of operations, Henderson understood that Rebecca Walsh had transformed from a discredited veteran into the tip of the spear in America's fight against sophisticated terrorist networks. The simple woman with combat stories had become the key to protecting the nation she had never stopped serving, even when that nation had stopped believing in her. Outside the Pentagon, dawn was breaking over Washington, but inside the Crisis Action Center, the real battle was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.